God is not threatened by situations and circumstances. God is not threatened. His ability to make something happen is not threatened by our questions. God is God. And he responds to Habakkuk and he said, wait a minute. You can write it down. You can make it plain. You can count on it. The one who reads it can run with it.
Seems like all I could see was the struggle, haunted by a ghost that lived in my past, bound up in shackles of all my failures, wondering how long is this gonna last. Then you look at this prisoner and say to me, son, stop fighting a fight, it's already been won. I am redeemed, you set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. I'm redeemed. All my life I have been called unworthy, the voice of my shame and regret. But when I hear you whisper, child, lift up your head, I remember, oh God, you're not done with me yet. I am redeemed. You said so I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be, because I don't have to be the old man inside of me, 'cause his day is long dead and gone. Because I've got a new name, a new life, I'm not the same, and a hope that will carry me home. I am redeemed. You set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. You set me free, so I'll shake off these heavy chains, wipe away every stain. Now I'm not who I used to be. Oh God, I'm not who I used to be. Jesus, I'm not who I used to be. I am redeemed. Thank God, redeemed.
Last Sunday was our first Sunday to take a look at Habakkuk. And we've been walking through the Old Testament on Sunday mornings and taking a couple of Sundays in each book. And last Sunday we shared together from Habakkuk 2:4, which tells us the just shall live by faith. And today we're going to revisit that a little bit and see how that relates to what was taking place in Habakkuk's world. I love the book of Habakkuk. It's a short book. Again, it may be one of those Old Testament books that's tucked away in your Bible that you don't frequent. But I want to encourage you, if that's the case, I want to encourage you to discover the message of Habakkuk. And I think today you're going to recognize that Habakkuk has some very relevant things to say to our lives today. You know, as human beings, we wrestle with things. Sometimes we wrestle with God. I like the picture that we find of Jacob wrestling with God in the book of Genesis, and it talks about how that he wrestled and he desired, and it's portrayed as a wrestling for a blessing. And in the end, Jacob is blessed, but his hip's out of joint from the wrestling match. And can I just turn that a little bit to say, we spend a lot of life out of joint. Can I get a witness? Sometimes in our wrestling, we get out of joint, and that's a way of describing our humanity. It's a way of describing some of the struggles we have. It's a way of describing the pain that comes from things that sometimes we don't understand, sometimes we question. Habakkuk covers that in a marvelous way, and in the process, introduces us to a new way of life. Now, what I'd like to do is to begin in the first chapter of Habakkuk, and as you take a look with me at chapter 1 and those opening verses, I want to remind you just a little bit of the setting here, where in Habakkuk's another one of those prophets where the people of God have been living in an ungodly manner. They've fallen into idolatry. They have not been faithful and true to God's word, his teaching, his law. And as a result of that, we are on the verge of that time when God is going to use an ungodly people to judge his ungodly people. He's going to take another nation, another kingdom, another force, and he's going to use them to bring about change in his own people and bring about punishment. That's sort of the backdrop to what takes place as you open up in Habakkuk chapter 1. Now, I'd like for you to notice with me verses 2 through 4, and then I'm going to skip down, and I want to read verse 13 as well. So check it out here. It says this, "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention rises. Therefore, the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, perverse judgment proceeds." Now listen to verse 13. "You are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he?" There's a back and forth to Habakkuk, where Habakkuk has questions and God has answers. But you have to see that Habakkuk is contending. He's contending with God. He's voicing his concern. He's raising these questions. And to begin with today, I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about what we see in Habakkuk in 2, 3, and 4, those verses, and also verse 13, because it shows to us some things. I want us to take this to heart today personally and to consider the questions that we ask God. I'd like to start today, before I talk a little bit about a different way to live, I'd like for us to start with just considering the kinds of questions that we ask God. And when we do that, if you look at Habakkuk, for example, he asks some of the same questions maybe that you and I ask God. God, how long? How long, God? How long will I cry out and you will not hear? How long, God, will you be silent? How long, God? Have you ever asked that question? Have you ever asked God how long? Have you ever been impatient with God? Please don't answer out loud. Have you ever had those kind of questions? Have you ever asked God, why? Why, God? Habakkuk says, why do you show me iniquity? Why do I have to see the things? Why, God? Why? And then down here he asks why again. Why do you look? God, why do you see what you see and allow this to happen? I think it's good for us to look at Habakkuk and to ask, Habakkuk, are you asking the same kind of questions that I ask? It's good for us to consider the questions that we bring before God. To consider the questions. Now, I want to follow through with that and say it's also good to consider the issues behind our questions. Because there are questions and then there are issues behind questions. And I touched on that a moment ago when I said, sometimes when we ask the question, how long, it's not really the question, it's the issue behind the question. It's impatience. Sometimes it's selfishness. Sometimes it's pride. You think I'm different than everyone else. I deserve. I'll never forget one time. Confession is good. I was talking to someone the other day about this. I don't remember how or why it came up in conversation, but I remember being in Six Flags Over Georgia. Anyone ever been to Six Flags Over Georgia? Good. I went several times as a teenager. Anyone ever been kicked out of Six Flags Over Georgia? Just curious who my audience is here. All right, good. I was on the verge. I thought that it was okay for me to cut line one time because I was asking a question, and actually I had an issue behind the question. I felt like I should be able to move toward the front of the line. And this was before I was saved, and I was living on the streets in a life of crime. And no, I'm sorry. No. And it was funny because it was like this person in a Six Flags uniform appeared out of nowhere. Could have been an angel. With this big red marker, Noble. And before I knew what happened, they grabbed my hand and put this big red X on my hand. Big as life, right there in line. And they got right in my face and said, you get in trouble one more time, young man, you're out of here. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. I'll go get in the back of the line. Now, sometimes in life, do you ever feel like things deserve, that you deserve to have things happen a little more quickly than they're happening? You can say amen to that. Maybe you've never cut line. Maybe you've never been one of these people that drives down the emergency lane when everyone else is waiting on the exit. Can we get real for a minute? You know, I know you haven't, but you know someone who has. You just think things need to go more quickly than what they're going. You've never tapped your foot in line at the bank or at the grocery store. Why? Because I deserve for things to happen more quickly. Those are small things. But let's talk about God for a minute, because those issues creep into our relationship with God. And what Habakkuk asked the question, how long, God? How long will I cry out and you won't hear? The issue behind the question, he asked these questions, and now consider the conclusions that we reach. Listen, from the question to the issue to the conclusion. Habakkuk, how do you know God's not hearing you? That's the question I have. We began to reach conclusions. We began to reach conclusions. How long? Because it's taking longer than I want it to take. God, you're not hearing me. And I don't know whether God ever says, oh, really, out loud. But if he does, this would have been one of those times where God would say, oh, really? You think I didn't hear you? Guess what? God knew that Habakkuk's words would wind up written down for us to read in 2013. You think God didn't hear what he was saying? God preserved his words. God preserved his questions. God, and when Habakkuk stands in the presence of God, that's when the oh really gets good. Because he says, oh really? Hey, Habakkuk, when you get a chance in the 21st century, check out what they're reading at Heritage Fellowship. I heard you. Yes, I heard you. We go from questions. We need to look at the issues behind our question because we jump to conclusions. And when we reach those conclusions, then we begin to elevate ourselves a little bit more. Because what Habakkuk says, because of what I believe about you, God, I have a problem. Because I believe that you're a powerful God. I believe that you're a mighty God. I believe, God, that you have the capacity and the ability to do some things. That you have the ability to do something about this situation. I believe that, and therefore, whenever you see a therefore in Habakkuk, it ought to cause you to stop and think, how did he reach this conclusion? Because when you get to therefore, he says, therefore the law is powerless. Oh, really? Therefore, justice never goes forth. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Then he says, therefore the law is powerless. Therefore, justice never goes first. Therefore, perverse justice proceeds. Listen, on the other side of those therefores are conclusions that Habakkuk has reached based upon what he believes about God. And these are his conclusions. He reads that and he says, God, I see what's going on. I know, God, that you have the power to do it, but you choose not to. Therefore, he moves into generalizations. And when our emotions get involved with us, and our frustration level raises, and our issues start to come to surface in life, we will make generalizations. Let me give you a real life example. I know no one has ever had any conflict at home with a spouse or with a child, so you've probably never heard it said, you never listen to me. That's a perfect example of a generalization. Never? Really? Really, never? Look at how Habakkuk moves from a situation to a generalization. And we do it all the time. When our emotions well up within us and our frustration grows and our issues start to surface, we go from questions and we start to let those issues get the best of us. And the first thing you know, God's never been just. The law is powerless. Perverse justice proceeds. Evil is winning. God doesn't hear. It's just bad. Is any of that true? Is the law powerless? Does justice never go forth? How does Habakkuk get there? He gets there not because he's asking questions, but if you will take a look at your questions, the questions sometimes are often not as important as the issues behind the questions. What is driving me to question God this way? What is it that God's trying to do in me? Now, let me turn the page quickly because I want to go here. I want to also say that sometimes we make those generalizations because it feels good to do that. Makes me feel more right if I can say, God, you just don't do this. And the more we feed that frustration, the better it feels sometimes to be frustrated because we seem to feel validated about that. And so Habakkuk is just in a wad, and he's upset with God. And so he wants to just keep going and pushing the envelope and throwing it out there. But notice the turn, because in Habakkuk 2:4, and we talked about this verse last week, but I want to put it in context because there's a shift in verse 4 of chapter 2, and basically it's a shift to say, you know what, there is a different way to live, because often the issues that are surfacing in our lives are tied to that root of pride, that root of selfishness, that root of, God, you're not behaving the way I think you ought to behave. God, you're not doing what I think. God, I know you're powerful. I know you're mighty. I know you can hear, but you're just not acting the way I want you to act. And that surfaces up pride and selfishness. And so chapter 2 begins to turn the page and say, you know what? There is a different way to live. Look at this. Chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. Then the Lord answered. When Habakkuk and the Lord go back and forth, pay attention to how the Lord answers. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold the proud. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. God says, let me show you a different way to live. Let me show you a different way to live. And I want to start out with that passage by saying it's a phrase that we use a lot of time, and I like the phrase in this case because it is, you can write it down. What do we mean when we say you can write it down? We mean it's a fact. We say you can write it down, it's going to happen. And when we use that phrase, even in our language today, what we're saying is you can count on it. This is a dependable promise. This is something you can take it to the bank. You can count on it. You can depend on it. And God says that, Habakkuk. He says, Habakkuk, write it down. Make it plain. When it comes to what God says, you can write it down. God is not threatened by situations and circumstances. God is not threatened. His ability to make something happen is not threatened by our questions. God is God. And he responds to Habakkuk and he said, wait a minute. You can write it down. You can make it plain. You can count on it. The one who reads it can run with it. We use that phrase too. Some of these phrases that we use have good roots in the Bible. We say you can take that and run with it. Why do we say that? Because it is sure. There's a guarantee. It's a fact. Write it down. Run with it. You can believe in it. Now listen, as we read that, he says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. Now, when you make an appointment, if you call to make an appointment, someone holds the authority in that when you are requesting an appointment. God has the authority as far as appointments, Habakkuk. God is the one who determines what the appointed time is. And he goes on to say this. He says, wait for it will surely come. Listen, in Hebrews 11:1, it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It is the evidence of things not seen. In verse 6, it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. It requires faith for us to trust in God as an appointment keeper, to trust in God to be able to accomplish his vision, to trust in God to be able to fulfill the things he said, to trust in God's ability to rule and to reign. And what the call is for us to live by faith. The just shall live by faith. Now that's a different way of living, because Habakkuk was struggling with that. Habakkuk was struggling with faith. He was struggling with living by faith. He was looking around. He was seeing the conditions of the world around him. He was questioning God. He was questioning whether God was listening, whether God was checked out, whether God was going to do anything. He was questioning about what God had in mind. And God says, you can count on me. You can trust in me. But the only way you're going to be able to do that is to have faith in me. And that's a different way of living. It's a different way of living. We see that at another level in chapter 3. Each of these chapters is so rich. Again, I want to encourage you, read the entire book if you haven't already. But I want to encourage you to look at the back and forth. I want to encourage you to look at chapter 2 as a different way of live, moving from our pride and our selfishness to a life of faith. A life of faith that requires us to be humble before God as the one who keeps his word. A God who understands the times. A God who knows when we should wait and we should tarry. A God who knows what it's like for us to walk by faith and not by sight. But in chapter 3 now, we're going to see another level of a different way to live. And this way is not just to live by faith, but to choose to praise, and a praise for God that doesn't depend on our circumstances. Take a look with me to chapter 3. I want to read the last 3 verses here, 17, 18, and 19. It says, though the fig tree may not blossom, though nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no fruit, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Listen, there are 3 descriptions there. Fig trees not blossoming. There's no fruit on the vines. Though the labor of the olive may fail and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold and there be no herd in the stalls. You know, those three statements that carry on. They describe difficult times. They're taken really from the fields and from the flocks in a way that was readily understandable to Habakkuk in his day. But they're not difficult for us to understand. What God is saying is, look around. Look around and see a time that is difficult. See a challenge. In your life right now, you may be in a time where these phrases fit in your life. It's a challenging time. Now, verse 18 is a turning point. Different way to live. Different way to live. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high hills. It is a beautiful, beautiful hymn of praise for us that is rich in meaning. You see, after every though in these 3 verses points to our circumstances. Every though is followed by a description of your circumstances. You fill in the blanks in your world. You fill in the blanks in your life right now. Talking about a different way to live. Though I'm facing this particular challenge in my life. It may be a challenge in a relationship. It may be a challenge in your finances. It may be a challenge in your own world, at work, at home, at school. It may be a challenge that no one even knows about. They don't know the details. They don't know the pain. They don't know the struggle. They don't know. But after that though in your life, every one of us has something that we can fill in there. Every one of us. But notice, after every though is what we see, it's what we know, it's what we feel, it's our world, it's our circumstances, it's life, sometimes we say. After the yet points us in a different direction. You see, though points us to what we see, what we feel, what we know, yet points us in a different direction. That direction is where we find our help. That direction is where we find our help. And it says, yet I will worship the Lord. I will rejoice in the Lord. Look at what he says. It takes us to a different place. It takes us to the place where we can look to God. It takes us to the place where we can find our help. When we don't know what to do about our circumstances, we do know that the yet takes us to a different place, a different direction than where we're traveling. He gives us the words to say when we don't know what to say. And the words to say is, say, the Lord is my strength. When we don't know what to say, when our circumstances, when we have this series of those in our life that point us to what we see and feel and know and what our life is like at the time, we need the yet to take us to say, when you don't know what to do, you do know what to do. When you don't know what to say, you do know what to say. The Lord is my strength. The Lord is my strength. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the Lord. I will find in the Lord. Say, the Lord is my strength during those times.